Good afternoon, welcome to our channel. Look, there are a lot of really great and some really good methods of preserving food out there, and all of them have value. I'm going to talk about why freeze drying is my favorite and why there are so many reasons why I think this is the best method out of any of the food preservation techniques. I'm also going to dispel some crazy myths about these things and clear up some really odd misconceptions about them. Let's get going. As I mentioned before, every single preservation method for food has value, and I don't want that message to be lost, but some are just way better than others. And on this channel, we have shown that we use all those methods. We've made videos on fermenting, freezing, freeze drying, vacuum sealing, pressure canning, regular water bath canning, and dehydrating. I own the equipment for all of those methods. The only one I never showed on the channel that we actually do is water glassing eggs. I might make a video about that in the near future. Okay, by far the biggest thing that everybody talks about when it comes to freeze dryers is the cost. Right now, the new medium freeze dryer, which has 5 trays instead of this older one, which has 4 trays, is $2,300. When I got mine, they were $28.95. And yes, that initial investment is above what a lot of people can pay. However, I'm going to prove in this video that it is not as expensive as you think if you take it over time, and some of the other methods can cost a decent amount of money as well. So I want you to stick with me through the entire video as I explain absolutely everything about cost related to these. And if you do the math really fast, there is a 20% drop in price over 3 years ago for these, so they are coming down. In terms of cost, you need to look at the initial investment cost for the equipment. For all methods, you need to compare it to the other methods. You need to look at the value that's there. You need to look at the cost to run that equipment. You also need to look at the cost of prepackaged foods, prepackaged freeze-dried foods, or if you're dehydrating, prepackaged dehydrated food, or if you're canning, prepackaged canned food. Let's lay out the cost of different machines, okay? So I took the time to look at the high and low ranges for all different types of food preservation equipment. One of them is this machine. So for freeze dryers from Harvest Right specifically, which is the lowest price that I can find that's not shipped directly from Alibaba from China, this is $2,300. And the most expensive, the large one, I believe is $3,400. A pressure canner, you can spend as little as $200 or as much as about $450 to $460 for a really nice canner. A water bath canner is probably the cheapest equipment you are going to get. It's about 50 bucks for a 21 quart, and you can find that almost everywhere. Now, dehydrators are deceiving. So the one that I have over here is, I think it's a Chef Man, and it was $140 on Amazon a few years back. However, it's quite small and it doesn't equal the same amount of food that I could put in there as I can put in here. So I looked at other dehydrators, and what people don't know is you can find pretty sizable dehydrators that are upwards of $2,000. So that's almost the same as this. Ones in the middle range at about $300 for a good decent dehydrator. I believe the Excalibur is about $300 to $350. And you probably don't need a large $2,000 dehydrator unless you are dehydrating a lot of food. And then vacuum sealers. There are so many different types of vacuum sealers out there. You can spend as little as $70 on a food saver, upwards of about $800 to $1,000 on a chamber vac sealer. And then of course your freezer. Do you buy an extra freezer for extra food that you are trying to save? Sure, absolutely. You can get a chest freezer, a small chest freezer at Home Depot for about $170. But then obviously with a freezer, you can really go up in cost quite quickly. So that's the range. You can see this is at the top end, and some like the water bath canner, 50 bucks, that's at the low end. Now you can also say that yes, you can use the sun to dehydrate food, and that is a fantastic option. It's worked well for years. You can build a fire and smoke fish, dry fish. You can build a little smokehouse and smoke mostly meats. I don't know if it works really well with preserving vegetables. I've never done it. I really haven't seen much information on that, but that may be the cheapest method. It may not be below that $50 once you're building the little smokehouse and all the stuff that goes along with it. You can pretty much spend whatever you want to preserve your food. Here's another myth, and that is the length of time that it takes to process food for the freeze dryer. I've seen some arguments out there that say it takes twice as long to process food for your freeze dryer and get it in there and get it taken care of. That is absolutely not true. In my opinion, it is way faster than processing things for, say, like canning. Like we canned pears a few years back because we had a fantastic harvest. It took us the entire day. Blanch it, take the skin off, cut them up, cut out the seeds, get them in the can, get them canned in the water bath canner. That process would have been way faster in the freeze dryer. And I want you to stick around because I'm going to talk about times for dehydrating versus a freeze dryer at the end of the video. Another myth about a freeze dryer is there's a lot of maintenance, you got to take care of it all the time. Totally untrue. So I change the oil in this Premier pump once every 25 cycles. That's it. And the cost of the oil is negligible. I could not even calculate it because the oil you can filter and reuse. One 32-ounce bottle of the premium oil for this pump is only $16. That is going to last you years. So you can't even calculate that cost in because it is almost nil. Other than that, zero maintenance. I don't have to do anything with this. So I don't know where those odd conceptions are out there. When I change the oil in the Premier pump, which is the only thing I have to do, it takes like 10 minutes. All right, here's another odd one. Freeze-dried food takes up a lot of space. No, not really. It is the same size as when it goes into the freeze dryer. So if you have, say, a 16-ounce New York strip, that's a big New York strip. All right, say it's a porterhouse, 16-ounce porterhouse. It's going to be the same physical size as when it went in, when it comes out. But it's going to be light as a feather, and that is a huge advantage. Yes, it'll take up the same amount of space, but unless you live in a tiny home with 10 people, it's really not that big of a deal at all. In terms of weight, look at this. So I've got, all right, we'll put 2 fingers on this. This is an entire tote full of freeze-dried food up to the top. It is light as a feather. My 72-year-old mother could lift this up onto a top shelf. So the weight savings is actually a big deal because storing things up high, if you need the room, is an important thing. Now, dehydrated foods can be light as well, and that is an advantage of them, but they are not as light as freeze-dried food. Okay, let's talk about electricity costs. I'm going to break that out from the other costs, and I'm going to talk about more costs even later, so stick around for that. Electricity costs, yes, electricity can vary everywhere. If you have a solar system, you can most certainly get free electricity for your freeze dryer or other methods. And electricity costs are roughly 17 cents per kilowatt hour on average in the United States. So this is my little Chefman dehydrator. Works great. I like it. It's worked for years, even though it was fairly inexpensive at about, what did I say, $140, give or take. And it works. It does a good job. I put a kilowatt meter on it yesterday and ran a load for 10 hours. I did the load at 122 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about the range where you really want to do it. It's not super high and it's not super low, so it's going to be in the middle. For that 10 hours, I used 2 kilowatt hours, equaling 34 cents. 17 cents per kilowatt hour times 2. But is 10 hours enough to dry the food that is in your dehydrator? And I'm going to cover that question also later in the video in an expanded section. You are going to be surprised. Okay, a little hint ahead of time, it's not enough time to dry anything except for herbs sufficiently. And you're going to see the cost start to go up. Now, I did not do an embodied energy test on how much my propane stove would use if I was canning something. So if that's something you have information on, please leave it for us in the comments section below. I venture to say that that's probably going to be a lot less than any appliance using electricity, because the average propane stove only uses about 50 gallons per year if you are cooking on it every single solitary day. So doing a few runs of pressure canned food on the stove is probably not going to cost that much. Okay, another big one, a huge debate, and there's some myths out there that need to be dispelled, not necessarily about this, but other methods, is storage time or length of storage. It's been proven over and over and over again that 25 years is the normal shelf life for freeze-dried food. So this freeze-dried soup that I did last year should be good until 2048. Now, does anybody need to preserve anything for that long? Well, I don't know. I didn't have a harvest in my garden this year because my soil got contaminated. So I needed some extra length of time on the things that I did preserve prior to that in the previous year. So one of the big myths out there is that dehydrated foods can last 15 to 20 years. That is anecdotal at best. The University of Oregon, Oregon State and the University of Georgia both have food safety and food preservation programs that are very well known. They are looking at only between 6 and 12 months for many dehydrated foods. That is a huge difference from 15 to 20 years. They're looking at fruits from between 4 to 12 months, beef jerky from 3 to 6 months, and smoked fish from 6 to 12 months. And keep in mind that that dehydrated food must be stored in a cool, dry place that is dark. Now that's the same thing with any preserved food because light will start to affect it, temperature will start to affect it. It doesn't matter if it's freeze-dried food because temperature and light will also affect that. So in terms of canned foods, 2 to 5 years is the window to where that food is the best. Now I've heard of people opening up commercially canned things years later, like 10 years later, and they have been fine. It's up to you what you want to eat though. And in terms of dehydrated food, that length of time is really going to be affected by how much moisture is left in the item itself. For fruits, it can be upwards of 25%. That's why they don't last very long. Okay, there's one caveat to that. There is a multi-step process that you can do to meats to get them to about the same moisture level and similar to freeze-dried. And that is you can pressure can the meat, shred it up, take it out, and then dehydrate it. And what that does is just break down everything in the meat so the fibers kind of fall apart and it's easier for the dehydrator to pull out the moisture. But look at that process. Is that less energy cost than it would be to do it in a freeze dryer? I say no, because you are going to have to take the time to can it and use that energy for the stove, which yes, it isn't that much. But then you also have to take another step and dehydrate it for a longer period of time than is normal. Now here is a big one, nutrient retention. And we all know that a freeze dryer will help retain almost 100% of the nutrients in the food. We know that freezing does that. So when it goes through the freeze drying process, pretty much all of those nutrients are retained. Now the myth or argument out there is that you will cook the food after rehydrating it from the freeze dryer, and then you're gonna cook off all those nutrients anyway that you tried to save. Well, that is true. However, it is not true with foods that you're going to eat raw anyway, like fruits and some vegetables. Now, to keep those nutrients and to utilize them in your body, you want to eat the food raw. So if you're eating freeze-dried pineapple, you are getting almost all of the vitamin C that is contained within that pineapple when it's fresh. However, I do have to say that that is time sensitive as well. So if it's a 20-year-old freeze-dried pineapple, the vitamin C is going to be almost lost. And when you are heating things, whether it's through canning or dehydrating, more than 20% of the nutrients are going to be killed off and destroyed in that heating process. The volatile ones that go right away are vitamins A and C. But the myth that's out there is that it retains everything else in a dehydrated food, and that's simply not true. Calcium, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium are all reduced with heat. It's also claimed that carbs, proteins, and fats will not be affected in your dehydrated food. That is also simply just not true. Lipids will oxidize very quickly when you add heat to them. Proteins will also clump together and degrade at higher heats. But if the food is acidic, like meats are, I think, at a pH level of 5.4 and a little bit below, they will degrade way faster. Carbs are actually the only thing that stays relatively the same. And actually, if you add heat to carbs, then they are easier to digest. So that's a positive in terms of heating up carbs in a dehydrator. Freezing is another way to preserve nutrients. However, there are some active enzymes still when the food is frozen. So those nutrients will also break down and degrade, although much slower than many of the other methods. And if you freeze your food and then use it, say, a year later, 2 years later for a smoothie, you're still getting a lot of those nutrients back because it's still in a raw form. If you cook that frozen food, then it's going to be lost anyway. So think about how you're eating your food as well as how you're preserving your food. Before I jump back to costs, I want to talk about one other myth that is out there, and that is that you can preserve any food with any method. That is also just simply not true. There are some methods that work great for certain things and badly for other things, and that includes the freeze dryer. However, with freeze drying, you have the opportunity to preserve the most amount of foods compared to the other methods. Friends, certain things using certain methods just cannot be preserved in the home kitchen. So let's pick on dehydrating again for the home kitchen. You can dehydrate milk in your dehydrator. It takes a decent amount of time to do it, and the quantities are very small. You have to put it on like a fruit roll-up tray and in a very thin level, maybe a half a cup to, I think, maybe a cup, depending on the size of your dehydrator. And I mean a half a cup to a cup per tray. As a comparison, in the freeze dryer, for just one cycle, you can freeze dry gallons of milk. So you have to look at the cost there too. If you're doing gallons in here for one run, and you are doing just cups in a dehydrator, then that is a huge cost difference. This bean soup was from our leftovers, from a meal we had a year and a half ago. We put it in the freeze dryer, and now we have soup that'll last us a long period of time. This could not be done very well at all, if at all, in our dehydrator. It is possible, but it is extremely difficult to do on a small fruit roll-up tray in a dehydrator. As another example, you can dehydrate low sugar sauces in your dehydrator and they will last for a long time. But you cannot dehydrate a high sugar sauce, like a fruit sauce or anything like that. Essentially, that's a fruit roll-up. It will just not fully dehydrate because of those sugars totally and completely. It will in the freeze dryer. Okay, I said I was going to tell you about length of time for your dehydrator. A lot of people are unaware on how long they actually take. So you take that amount of money that I spent to do a 10-hour cycle earlier. That could be up to 4 to 5 times as long depending on the food that you put in there. Peaches are one of the things that take the longest to dehydrate. We have peach trees. If I wanted to preserve them using that dehydrator, it would take me 36 to 48 hours at 122 degrees Fahrenheit, give or take, maybe up to 135 to be able to do that. Pears, cherries, apricots all take 24 to 36 hours. Now, if you move to a savory fruit like an eggplant, that's only 12 to 14 hours, or a pumpkin is only 10 to 18 hours. So a load of pumpkin, putting it in there for dehydration, could only run you about 34 cents. But for those peaches for a load, that could run you up to $1.36. Now get this, the average cost for running a freeze dryer per run, fully loaded, is between $1 and $2. Our most expensive run that we put in here cost us $3.40. And that was with a load of sticky fruits like grapes and blueberries, because they do need a longer process, a longer period of time in the freeze dryer to be able to completely dry properly. Now, the last cost comparison I'm going to talk about is buying freeze-dried food compared to buying good organic produce at the store in organic meats and doing them yourself. There's an amazing backpacking website that broke down the cost and did all the math on comparing these two things together. And I will link that in the description below along with some other links. Because I don't remember these numbers specifically, I'm going to read them here. I've got them written down. So this is for one 500 calorie meal. So doing it yourself in your own freeze dryer, vegetarian, would cost you about 98 cents. In omnivore, meaning, you got a pasta mixed with some vegetables and some meat, you've got a cost of $2.55. And that is over a range of different vegetables and pastas and meats that they broke it down. So with the purchased option, they took samples from 9 different freeze-dried food companies, and they averaged $10.45 per 500 calorie meal for vegetarian, and oddly less for the omnivore or with meat and vegetables together. It was $10.17 per 500 calorie meal. Now, doing it yourself did not take into account the cost of the freeze dryer. So let's add that in. That cost for vegetarian options with running this 54 times would be $8.75. So much less, well, $2 less than if you purchased it. For an omnivore meal, it would be only $6.75 with 41 runs of your freeze dryer. So taking all that into account, I do about 35 runs per year with this. And for the cost of a current freeze dryer, I would have this paid off in only 1.5 years. Paid off completely. Then you don't have to add that cost on in the future. So everything that you're making after that, for as long as this thing lasts, and it should last for years and years and years, your vegetarian options are going to be that, what, 98 cents? But I can say, if you are using one of these a lot, whether you're a backpacker, a camper, or you're putting up your harvest on your property, this is going to pay itself off very quickly, being way less expensive after that first year and a half than buying any more freeze-dried food ever. And I also did a video in the past which talks about all the preservatives that are contained within certain brands of freeze-dried food. And it's stuff you do not need in the food at all because it is freeze-dried. All it has to be is pure. You don't have to put any preservatives in it. It's already preserved. If you can't tell, adding preservatives to food that it doesn't need bothers me a lot. So for me, friends, the value is here to save our harvest, to save on nutrients, and to save our leftovers, which is big because there is a lot of food waste in households in the United States. So for us, the value is just there. And the cool thing that Harvest Right does is a 0% layaway program, so you can pay on it per month as much as you want. I am not saying anybody needs one of these, right? But if you're investing in equipment for your homestead, you know, you're investing in solar, that is not an inexpensive thing to get. You're investing in a tractor. That is not an inexpensive thing to get. You're investing in a greenhouse. That is not inexpensive either. You're investing in equipment to run your homestead. This is just another piece of equipment that the cost, actually compared to some of those other things I just mentioned, is on the low end of things. And I never want to make anyone feel bad about not being able to get one of these. There are other great methods that I just talked about that can do great things. Start with a water bath canner and start canning for 50 bucks. Grab an inexpensive chest freezer, whatever it is. Just start preserving food. That's all I want you to do. Right now, Harvest Right has a Black Friday sale. It goes to the end of the month until the 30th. The prices are amazing. And full disclosure, I'm an affiliate for this company. If you're interested in one of these machines, I have a link for them in the description below the video. And if you have any questions about what I talked about, please leave me a comment in the comment section below. Now, I want you to have a beautiful, blessed day. Take care, and we'll see you next time.